Now, one of the biggest fundamental mistakes that I feel the sequel trilogy made was not making Anakin Skywalker or his alter ego Darth Vader a real or significant part of the story. That if anything, those movies and the story it told undid Anakin's importance by simply bringing back Palpatine with virtually no explanation, and letting someone else, the granddaughter of a clone of Palpatine, not an actual Skywalker, be the one who ultimately kills Palpatine in the end, with the help of all the Jedi, where Anakin is just one voice among many, and where it doesn't even matter that Anakin or any of the others became a Force ghost because other Jedi who didn't become one simply showed up, or should I say spoke, and inspired and or somehow helped Rey in the end. And all of this means Anakin wasn't the one to finally bring balance to the Force by destroying the Sith, that he didn't fulfill the prophecy of the Chosen One, and that he really didn't have a very noteworthy role to play in the final battle, or in the sequel trilogy in general. But never fear, it seems an upcoming story in the ongoing Darth Vader comic book will change all that and connect Vader to Episode 9 in a huge way, or so we learned during the Lucasfilm publication panel at Comic-Con. In fact, Greg Pak, the writer of this comic, had this to say about the upcoming story. At the end of our first arc, Vader claims to have settled all his previous business, but the Emperor knows better. He knows Vader hasn't settled anything. Vader is going to suffer a terrible punishment and undertake a new journey/quest, and there are key elements that will tie into Episode 9 in a huge way. There are some doors that have been thrown wide open, which dig into some great unexplored territory and dig deeply into the heart of Vader. Once again, I can't believe they're letting us do it. And, well, no offense to Greg Pak here, he's a fine writer, but I very much can believe they're letting you do this, because why not? What do they have to lose at this point in regards to the sequels? I mean, is it even possible for the fans who didn't like them to like them less at this point? Inserting Vader, and maybe to some degree Anakin, after the fact seems like an attempt, and maybe a desperate one, to draw some interest or attention to them, especially when, again, he should have already been a big part of the story in the movies. And sure, Kylo Ren had an on-again, off-again fascination with his grandfather, but in the end it turned out to be Palpatine speaking to Kylo in Vader's voice that influenced him. Not that I think Vader himself should have somehow survived, but the idea that some sort of dark remnant, some sort of dark side stain within the Force, was left upon Vader's helmet and was now trying to corrupt Kylo Ren could have been an interesting idea, especially if on the flip side, the Force ghost of Anakin was trying to send Rey to Luke to be trained in order to save his grandson Ben. And something like this seemed to be set up in the Aftermath trilogy of books, where we not only learned this very thing was possible, that Sith left a residual darkness on the items they once owned, especially masks and helmets, but that a group of Vader worshippers called the Acolytes of the Beyond had sprung up after his death and were trying to collect ancient Sith relics, as well as his old lightsaber and likely also his mask. And after The Force Awakens, the Knights of Ren were thought to be associated with the Acolytes of the Beyond, and maybe were even the ones who had given Vader's helmet to Kylo Ren. And though maybe those Aftermath books weren't the best written or most interesting story ever, because keep in mind all this stuff with the Acolytes of the Beyond was not the focus of the story, but rather something covered in interlude chapters. Anyway, though not the greatest books ever, there was an interesting idea there that maybe was some sort of original overall plan for the story of the sequels that started with J.J. Abrams' The Force Awakens, but got tossed out with Rian Johnson's The Last Jedi. Because that movie didn't even include the Knights of Ren at all, and saw Kylo Ren smash his helmet and seemingly move on from his Vader fascination. We also didn't learn why exactly it seemed Rey was being sent to Luke, why the Skywalker family saber, as some call it now, called out to her and reacted to her when she touched it, why at the end of Episode 7, it flew to her, a Palpatine, over Kylo Ren, a Skywalker. But I digress, because it just makes me sad to think that, though The Force Awakens wasn't the most original film ever, there was still hope for the overall story at that point. There were so many interesting ways Episode 8 could have gone that tied into the bigger story, that involved Anakin, Vader, the prophecy, and so on, but it just didn't. It was so focused on teaching everyone a lesson about failure that it became one itself. It failed to be a part 8 of 9, it failed to be a part of or advance not only the larger story of the Star Wars saga, but left the sequel trilogy in a position where it had nowhere to go, where some crazy, fast-paced, and cobbled-together fan service adventure would become its ending in Episode 9. Anyway, here, I know I've talked a lot lately about how Disney and or Lucasfilm are ignoring the sequels, or just letting them sit there for a while, but I'm not surprised that they'd try to throw something like this, something like Darth Vader, at them in a comic book and hope that something in it sticks and ends up being well received. Because, let's be real, in the grand scheme of things, not many fans read the comics, so this is the perfect place to experiment with something, even though, if I had to guess, this story will be probably about how Vader finds Exegol, and will likely have something to do with the Wayfinder device, or maybe he'll encounter the original Snoke or something, if there is an original Snoke. This is probably a story that's been planned for a while, but got delayed and pushed back along with every other comic book thanks to the global pandemic. Either way, whatever this ends up being will almost certainly be too little too late. Vader and Anakin should have been a part of the sequel trilogy. I've said it 100 times before at this point, but what I feel they should have done with the sequels is make it about the legacy of Anakin and Vader. Make it essentially a battle between those two legacies fought primarily by his grandchildren, and then you introduce some type of new threat to both the New Jedi Order, and maybe the Force itself, and to the New Republic that will push them both to the brink. So then when they overcome it in the end, the story of Star Wars can end with us believing the Republic and the Jedi Order that defends it will stand for another 1,000 generations. And sure, you can have some interesting twists and turns along the way, you don't have to make this generic, but the basic premise was so simple and obvious that I will never understand how they overlooked it and gave us what they did. Well, that's all I've got for this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think. Do you think there's anything that can be done around the sequel trilogy to make them better? Any context added or recontextualizing done that could improve the story? Or do you feel maybe they're fine as is, or is it the opposite? Do you think maybe they should just be scrapped altogether? Whatever the case may be, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.